Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now today we're going to be covering data visualizations. Data visualizations is kind of an obscure, almost esoteric term for a lot of people because it means a whole bunch of things. If we think about big data and we think about data reporting and marketing analytics and business analytics, and these are likely terms that you've heard of before in the past, it's not enough just to collect data. Right? We might collect data from sales of Toyota cars, or we might collect data from a survey put out by MTV to better understand teenager viewing habits. But we don't stop there. What we have to consider is how do we extract information and how do we make it nice? How do we beautify it? How do we make it appealing? It's not enough just to report a simple pie chart or a bar chart. As you'll see in this lecture, which is kind of an introduction into data visualizations, it's really critical to think about certain elements and points when we're trying to offer people information. After all, would you rather sit through a boring market presentation with kind of basic graphics and charts, or would you want something more attractive? At this point, you've watched a lot of my lectures and you've noticed, I hope, that I've paid attention to how my PowerPoints look. And while there can always be improvements on presentations, mine as well, it's important to really think about your audience and work to captivate them. No, just because people are in the room to listen to your third quarter sales report on Starbucks doesn't mean that they should just pay attention. You should really kind of scale back that impression as a presentation person yourself. Really think about who's in the room and should they care. Yeah, maybe their job title suggests that it does, but you want them captivated. You want them invested. So there's quite a bit of not only cool informatics and graphics, but also storytelling. The crux of any good data visualization is storytelling. It's important to think about how you want people to digest the material, because ultimately they're not going to remember all 30 slides or 50 slides or 80 slides for that matter. They'll go back and look perhaps later on, but you want to think about how can I guide this story along for my audience so that they can kind of hold on to a few things. So in today's lecture, we're going to be going through different kinds of charts and graphs, do's and don'ts of basic data visualization design. Let's get started. So we can look here at this stacked horizontal bar chart. Now this is a bar chart that is giving us a few pieces of information here. For one, you can see in the title, right above the graph, McDonald's Consumer Service Survey, Long Island City, October 2017. Fine. You can also see here that the way that this chart is orchestrated, it's meant to offer comparisons between particular answers. You can see on the left-hand side the indicators or the statements that consumers are being asked to judge. I would recommend this restaurant to another friend. The service at this restaurant was good. This restaurant is affordable. This restaurant has a great reputation. I enjoyed the food here. Now, is this, in your mind, a good chart? The answer should be no. And in fact, if you go to this chart here, you can see I've made a few additions. You can see here that instead of having the strongly disagree look like the disagree, neutral, and agree, I've isolated information here for my audience to better understand how much strongly agree do we have and how much strongly disagree do we have. This allows for a greater comparison. After all, most executives are interested in those who strongly agree and those who strongly disagree, for that matter, unless there's another reason to isolate or highlight other pieces of information. So that's the first thing that I've done here. I've color-coded strongly agree, I've color-coded strongly disagree. This allows us the opportunity to really be able to view differences between strongly disagree and strongly agree. Additionally, the color schemes here are pretty strong. You can see to the right, affordability was the highest score for McDonald's, and dissatisfaction was greatest with food enjoyment. And so on the right-hand side here, you can see that I've also plucked out little nuggets of information for audience members to better understand what they should be pulling away from this. If we go back to the previous slide, you can see here, I did none of that here. Sure, it's color-coded, but there are no numbers for percentages. There is no indication of what's greater and by how much. I'm forcing you to pull out facts and figures from this, which will frustrate you and ultimately disincline you from looking for any kind of data to pull from here. There are no stories being told here. You don't want to frustrate your audience. If we go back to the slide we were just at, you can see here I'm guiding people along to pick up what I want them to pick up. If you get aggressive with your data visualization, you narrate the story. Please write that down. You narrate the story if you get aggressive with data visualization. I don't have to guess and wonder what the story is here. You're telling me it. And in fact, if I'm still not picking up on it, I have some word captions to the right of this slide. I am able to guide my audience along here. Let's move along. This is another kind of chart here in which I'm, again, trying to illustrate different kinds of data points here. Now, it's important to demonstrate effectiveness when you're considering a provider here. That's kind of what this chart is signifying here. So it's asking customers about results, content expertise, local knowledge, national reputation, and other indicators when evaluating wireless provider, which is Verizon here. And so you can see here again on the right-hand side, I've broken this chart down to note certain pieces of information that are different or perhaps more important than other pieces of information. So the survey here shows that demonstration of results is the single most important dimension when choosing a service provider. Again, I have a word caption to the right. Affordability and experience working together previously, which were hypothesized to be very important to the decision-making process, were both cited less frequently as important attributes. So again, I've done a few things here. You have a scale at the bottom of the chart which illustrates percentages. Now, personally, I probably would have done what I did in the previous slide in which I had the percentages right next to the bars. But this is another way to showcase information here. Note that at the bottom, and this is really the proper way to present quantitative research, you always want to show three things. First, the question. You can see Q3 here. In general, which attributes are the most important to you in selecting a service provider? You can't show data to people without illustrating where it came from. Second, you want to show the base. Base is defined as who took the question. The people who answered this question were people or consumers who have signed up for Verizon in the last month. Because again, it's not enough just to say, well, we had adult females, or we had adult males, or we had people who, I don't know, have a smartphone service, right? We want to be precise in informing our audience who answered the question. That's important. The final thing that's important is the N, or the number of subjects. Everyone listening to this discussion should absolutely know what an N is at this point. N signifies and denotes the number of subjects. So here I had 1,541 people take this survey, or at least answered this question for that matter. Let's move along. You can use shapes as well to separate out charts. Now, these shapes have been blown up to some degree, kind of to illustrate to you what they look like, because they're a little bit tiny in the chart itself. But what is good to note here is that shapes can be useful in helping to denote different data points. It's a little bit boring, arguably, to simply have dots that represent certain data points in your chart. So if you can highlight shapes and if you can implement shapes here, it is a nice break for your audience to look at data presented differently. Let's move along here. Another kind of chart is, again, the stacked horizontal bar chart, but I have done something different here. As you can see here, I have icons. This is another customer survey satisfaction for fast food restaurants. You can see a few things have been done here. McDonald's is in light blue. You can see the legend right under the title. McDonald's is in light blue. Burger King is in dark blue. Chipotle is in red. Freshii is in kind of a green. And Subway is in more of a gray. And so you can see here, and this is very much very similar to some of the slides I created when I was working in market research, is that this is a nice way to present information again, because we have the indicator at the bottom. You can see that, right? I enjoyed the food here for the first column. The second column, this restaurant has a great reputation. The third column, this restaurant is affordable, etc., etc. What's nice here is that your audience can quickly see, oh, that's for Burger King, that's for McDonald's. Quick, 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 to the point. Icons and logos are really, really gaining traction in data visualization because it's just quicker and easier for people to recognize visualizations. And so it's important to really think about implementing logos when appropriate during your PowerPoint creation. You want to be sure that, again, your audience can quickly find information. And my audience can. And a better way to improve this chart may even have been to color code the bars themselves to the logos, right? Perhaps McDonald's should have been a yellow, or a Burger King should have been maybe a kind of a beige or peach color, signifying kind of the bun color, as it were. And so these are other considerations to make as you're moving along in your PowerPoint presentation. Let's move along. This is a cleaner bar chart from what you saw earlier. This is another way to present the same kind of information. Tables tend to be weary on people as well. There's no question about that. But this is important to highlight when we're really thinking about what do we want people to know, right? For here, this column is easy to look at because you can make comparisons across. It's a little bit easier than the previous slide here. So this is another clean way to illustrate data points. And as you can see here, it's really nice to be able to see all of the McDonald's answers, right? They're all in one column. If we go back to the last chart that I was at, you can see here, you can make kind of comparisons, but it's a little bit difficult when you're trying to match up the percentages. And so again, these are questions that you have to reconcile yourself here. This is a nice chart if you're trying to present some sort of macro general comparison across all of the fast food brands. But if you want to make it easier on your audience, go to the next slide. As you can see with this chart, compared to the previous chart, you can see that you can simply see the answers simply by going from north to south. So again, this is just another way in presenting information. Some people will say that this is an unattractive chart. Some people will be happy with this kind of chart. And that's also the point to kind of realize with data visualization is it's important to recognize not everyone may appreciate a chart or a graphic that you create. The best thing you can do is to be as captivating as possible. Let's move along. Audience tips and strategies. And so in the next series of slides I'm going to show you, this is just another way to organize particular sections of your PowerPoint presentation. So it may very well be that you have a survey section, you have a focus group section, you have an introductory section or a market section or a brand analysis section. If you have these elements in your PowerPoint, you may want to list up front some of the things you're going to be covering. So in audience tips and strategies, I will be covering size, color, and use. For size, be careful with the size of your information and its viewability and consistency. you want to make sure that the sizes of your fonts, the sizes of your own slides look consistent and are appropriate. You never want anyone to struggle. My piece of advice that I could give you with size, no font on your PowerPoint decks should be less than 18. That's size-wise, 18. Because it'll usually show up in a PowerPoint presentation and there should be no eye strain. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. 2, color. Be sure to color to highlight items, not just to color for the sake of coloring. You want to make sure that every color that you deploy in your PowerPoint has a point. Use color sparingly. You don't need to use every color for every image. And you'll notice that with some of the slides that you've seen here thus far. I haven't colored every bit on the PowerPoint deck. That's not really the point. The point is to make things that are appealing and using color as a way to signify important information. Let's move along. As you can see here, it is the very same slide. It looks a bit differently though. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. Different ways of presenting a section header. Let's keep moving along. You can see that now I've placed audience tips and strategies at the bottom of the slide itself. This is a different way to kind of highlight the 3 things to remember here, right? And taking less attention or taking away less attention from audience tips and strategies, the title here. Let's move along. Again, different shapes and different ways of sharing the same kind of information here. Let's move along. You can also see here size, color, and use. I went from dark blue to a medium kind of blue and then to kind of a aquamarine or teal color for use. Let's move along. Here I have boxes. It's the same idea, box to arrow, to kind of illustrate some sort of train of thought here. Let's move along. So some industry examples. These are crucial to note here when you're thinking about what do I need to employ or do when I'm in industry. The fact is that I'm constantly learning myself how to do data visualizations. It's an evolving field. The informatics and infographics and Canva and Stencil and Unsplash and Pixabay and all of these other sites that are useful to better understand what's going on in the world of data visualizations is always changing. There are people now who are playing with GIFs and who are playing with videos in PowerPoints, all in a way to kind of get people interested in the content itself. And so the industry examples I have here are being used today, but it's kind of an evolving field. And so it's important to realize that if you want to make a career in creating PowerPoint presentations and working in advertisement or public relations, know that this is kind of something you're just going to have to keep brushing up on. As of this recording now, I've been brushing up on data visualizations as well, and I'm preparing new slides for the future as well. Let's get started. And so here, this is a data visualization, in fact, that's very, very similar to what I created back when I was doing market research. So you can see here, you can see the finding is up top. HBO's association with innovation grew this year, but Netflix still leads, total pop. Forced choice, top 3 entertainment brands, top 2 box. And so forced choice, top 3 entertainment brands, top 2 box, that's information surrounding the information, how it was collected here. So forced choice is forcing people to pick their top 3 entertainment brands. Top 2 box, if you can think of a scale 1 to 5, top 2 box is a phrase all of you should know that means only looking at people who agree and strongly disagree, right? The top 2 answers, the top 2 box on a scale. So top 2 box is those who strongly agree and agree. All the time and extremely, right? It's the 4 and 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. That's what a lot of market research firms will pay attention to. And so we can see here throughout the year that if this survey was given out every quarter, this is a nice way to display information. You can see first place, second place, and third place here, right? It's really easy to get a sense of, oh, okay, for innovation, which is the first row. For innovation in Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, what we have here is that Netflix is dominating, right? We use arrows here to signify major jumps. And so if you look at third place in the innovation row, you can see for quarter one, Amazon was at 29%. When we jump to Q2, we can see Amazon is at 37%, which is a significant jump. And so it gets a blue arrow. And you can kind of see that for all of these here, right? We're able to show our audience, hey, listen, we've done the nitty gritty. We can tell you who's in first place. We can tell you who's in second place. We can tell you who's in third place as well. And we can highlight it. We can even use arrows to get a better sense of what's going on here. So you can see at the bottom, awareness of HBO. Those were the people who took and answered this particular chart. And we also have N number of subjects at 275. So this is a slide that is similar to some of the work that I had done or have done in the past as a market researcher. It's a really, really nice way, again, to control the narrative and tell people what you want to tell people here. Let's move along. So data visualizations continued. In this particular section, we're going to be going through a little bit more about do's and don'ts here. This is kind of a departure from what we were doing earlier, just kind of getting our feet wet in data visualizations and PowerPoint presentations here. Let's move along. Pie charts and their evils. So, aside from being pizza or dessert pies, you should avoid them otherwise. Why? Pie charts can demonstrate parts and wholes of something. But there's an issue with that. Let's look at the next slide. You can see here, pies are very, very difficult when it comes to denoting or illustrating big and small differences. The 31% here in this chart, which tracks sales of McGraw-Hill textbooks in 2017, looks way bigger than the 34%. Does everybody see that? The 31%, which demarcates the third quarter, is bigger than the 34% for the fourth quarter. Now, if we talk to Microsoft PowerPoint about this, I'm sure a representative would say, no, it's accurate, the 34 is in fact bigger, and that very well may be the case. But for our eyes, it doesn't look like it. The way that the pie chart itself is tilted really looks terrible. You might first look at the 3D image, and it's got this strange tilting perspective. What to do instead here? I recommend that you probably replace this with a horizontal bar chart. Let's move along. This is another item to avoid. Avoid pies and avoid donuts. And so here you can see we kind of have the same issue. Donut charts are really, really awful to look at. For one, it's difficult to understand what the numbers might mean, especially for numbers like the 9% in the second quarter, or is it a 6%? It's very difficult for people to construe what some of these numbers may mean. And again, you're not able to really see the differences. The 34% looks just slightly bigger than the 31% here, which is an improvement. But again, the numbers are tilted, and you don't want your audience to strain. That's the biggest takeaway from this. You don't want your audiences to strain. You don't want your graphics to be hard to read. Let's move along. Another thing to avoid, please, 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 3D bar charts. These are ugly. They look hideous. You would never show this to anyone. Not anyone you are trying to impress or keep your job with. Avoid this at all costs. You might first look at this and it might look cool at first. It's a little bit nuanced or a little bit futuristic. It's awful. Avoid all 3D bar charts. I don't know why Microsoft PowerPoint does this. I have to hope that most people don't use this. It looks bizarre. It's hard to read. It is distracting artwork from the data. Please write that down. Do not ever create a chart that distracts from the data. You can only create charts that complement or enhance or support the data that you're trying to showcase. Otherwise, avoid it at all costs. Let's move along. Secondary, y-axis don'ts. This doesn't look good either. So again, we're still working with sales of McGraw-Hill textbooks, but what we have here is we have sales and number of books, which is fine, but it can be a little difficult to figure out what's what here. Now, if we look at the chart itself and we look at the percentages on the y-axis and then we look at sales on the y-axis, it's a little bit difficult to read. Again, we do have distracting artwork here, but there is a solution. Let's look at the next slide. You can see here, this is a nice fix. Here, I can show percentage of sales and I can show the number of books being sold on the y-axis here. And you can still see first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter of an annual year. And so it's nicer to be able to do this here in which we can really showcase data. You can offer complementary data here. Oh, these are the percentages of textbooks, and if you're curious about the actual number of textbooks being sold each quarter, well, we have those numbers here as well. And that's a little bit more useful for your audiences. So pull your charts apart vertically if you have to. It is way, way easier for you as a data visualization marketer. Let's move along. Word clouds. I'm actually a fan of word clouds. I think they're kind of a nice opening for a lot of market presentations. They're not necessary all the time. They're nice and useful because remember from our previous lecture, qualitative research is way more intuitive. It's way easier to understand qualitative research. And so if we're working with words, if we're working with different kinds of phrases, and if we're working with other bits of information here that are reliant on words, it's nice to be able to expand words that have been mentioned a lot or phrases that have been mentioned a lot, or shrink them down based on the amount of times they've been listed, right? So for a word cloud, there may be an open-ended question. What comes to mind when you think of Facebook? Or what comes to mind when you think of Dunkin' Donuts? And so you might say, oh, coffee, croissants, donuts, coffee lattes or macchiatos or anything else that you might find at a Dunkin' Donuts or at a Starbucks. So if you're listing these words, it's really, really useful to be able to kind of get a quantified list, to kind of have them counted out, and then to be able to say, oh, let's kind of expand these words to really illustrate how many times they've been stated. So let's go to the next slide here. As you can see here, this is a demo for a word cloud that I did based on, I think, my Facebook posts probably 3 years ago. So you're able to do this on Facebook, but you're also able to do this from a survey. You're able to do this with really any kind of collection of words. And so the word cloud itself, and it's something that you can Google and you can find a website that'll do this for you. They'll expand words that have been mentioned a lot and shrink words that were not stated as much. So I was able to kind of see here, and it makes sense because I had just graduated with my PhD from the University of Florida. I had a lot going on about Florida as a result. It can convey a lot to your audience about what's top of mind, right? If I ask you, again, going back to that aided awareness question, what comes to mind when you think of Dunkin' Donuts? Well, there are a lot of descriptors we can use, but it's a nice way to be able to quickly say, okay, people were mostly thinking about coffee and donuts. Here in this chart, you can see, well, Anthony was mostly thinking about Florida, universities, governors, legislator, metrics, board, student, all of these other big phrases, apparently. Those were top of mind for him. Now, if you multiply that by 1 million people, and that's what was top of mind for people, then you can start thinking about things that are relevant to your audience, things that are important to your audience, and descriptions that are typically used here. Let's move along. And again, you can see here that you can also go to wordclouds.com and you can kind of fix up different graphics. So for here, you can place your word cloud literally in a world. Here, there are clouds, there are crosses, there are stars. There are multiple different ways of creating word clouds here. Let's move along. So what are we building toward here? You can see here that the whole point with data visualizations is thinking about strong visuals. And one way to really do that is darkening background images, which I will show you in a second. The idea is to be able to tell a story without verbally explaining it. That is something else to note in your notes. You are trying to tell a story without verbally explaining it. It should be self-sufficient. One thing I've left out of this PowerPoint presentation is when I was doing market research for HBO and Sesame Street and everything, I didn't present to them that much. In fact, mostly what we did was create market research PowerPoint presentations and sent them to the companies. That meant that these PowerPoint presentations had to be sufficient. They had to be self-sufficient. They had to be able to speak on their own. There couldn't be any confusion. It was very likely that we would not be presenting the PowerPoint itself. Now, certain times we certainly had phone calls and other things that we would do with the company and go slide by slide. But we did not typically go to the companies to present the information itself. Our PowerPoints had to be self-sufficient. Let's move along. So one other thing to note here is using images to convey meaning. This is important here, and I've swiped this, or these two graphics, from the New York Times and from the Wall Street Journal. Let's especially look on the right-hand column for the Wall Street Journal chart. You can see here they've used icons, main sources of Islamic State funding. And so you can see here icons are used to really denote certain points. Humans are visual creatures. The more that we can use icons to put together with bullet points and notes and things to be mindful of, the easier it will be for people to remember. And that's what these icons really do help us do for our audience members. Yes, they're certainly engaging. They're a little bit more sexy and appealing and interesting to look at for sure, but it also helps our audience members remember. Let's move along. So you can see here I've created a self-deprecating slide about myself. And so you can see here I've used the time icon to denote I'm a researcher and a nerd, saxophone to denote that I am a fan of smooth jazz music, and green, I enjoy money, holding it, looking at it, so on and so forth. So you can see here, these are colorful icons, they look great, and they help kind of make my list more interesting and appealing. Let's move along. So this is the final slide that I will share with you in this data visualization presentation. You can see here that I've done a few things. So this slide is a slide that I created based on one of my alma mater, Syracuse University rankings. And so I just wanted to illustrate to you something else you can do with your PowerPoint slides as a way to kind of enhance look. You can see here that I have an image, and you can darken images on PowerPoint. It's a really useful tool that allows you to kind of darken and brighten images as you see fit. My recommendation is to darken images and use white text. As you can see here, it came out pretty well. There's always room for improvement. Additionally, if you want to use a lighter picture, you'll need to use dark text. So that's just something to be mindful of here. But you can see here that I was able to showcase two different charts pretty effectively. And I did this based around ensuring that the fonts were big enough to be seen. And I also did this so that people could get a sense of Syracuse University as something tangible, right? The image in the back, which is part of Syracuse University, makes it more tangible. it adds a little bit of color and character to the slide as well. And so I've listed here top Syracuse University college's annual profits. So I've placed that up there in that chart particular, and I've separated it out between the Newhouse School of Communications, the Whitman School of Business, and Syracuse Law School. You can see that the dots expand and contract based around high levels of annual profits, right? It's an easier way to look at data here. Additionally, to the left-hand side, I have university rankings. Forbes, U.S. News and World Report, etc., etc., etc. So hopefully what you've taken away from this with the data visualization lecture is that data visualization takes a lot of thinking. Sometimes we might have a sense of what we think is right, or what the story is, or what we want to tell people. Remember, your title is where you want to put your point, right? The finding, whatever people need to be taking away from your slide. Additionally, you want to be sure that you have a question, a base, and the number of subjects or participants at the bottom of your PowerPoint slide. That's exceptionally useful and a really good habit to be in, because you always want to inform people who is taking this particular survey question, who's answering it, where did they come from, why are they taking it. If you can follow these steps, you'll get better and better at this process. I myself am still working on it as we speak. Well, that's all the time we have for Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.